My name is Catherine, and I am 35 years old. My mom once called me a burden and ignored my urgent text from the emergency room because, in her words, they were busy with my sister, and I didn't realize until much later that this single sentence perfectly summarized my entire life. My parents have been treating me like their personal piggy bank ever since I got my first real job out of college, and back then I told myself it was temporary, that family helps family, that this is just what adults do for the people who raise them. It started with what they called just this once. Their air conditioner broke in the middle of July, and I still remember my dad calling me, practically hyperventilating, talking about how my mom was struggling in the heat, how her breathing issues were acting up, how dangerous it was. I transferred them $1,800 immediately without even thinking twice. They pinky promised they would pay me back when my dad got his bonus. That bonus came and went, and so did the promise, but I let it slide because they were my parents, and that's what good daughters do, right? 7 years passed in what felt like a blink, and somewhere along the way, just this once turned into everything. I was paying their mortgage, $1,500 every month, both of their car payments, around $650 total, their insurance premiums, another $800, random emergencies that somehow always popped up right before they planned trips to visit my aunt in Florida. Last year, I checked my bank statements and nearly had a heart attack. I had given them over $45,000. That's a down payment on a house. That's security. That's a future I didn't even realize I was bleeding away. Meanwhile, my sister Saren was their precious little angel who could do no wrong. She was 32 and still living in their basement because, according to my parents, finding an apartment is just so hard these days, and entry-level jobs don't pay enough. Yet she somehow always had money for Lululemon leggings and weekend trips to Nashville with her friends. She landed a cushy marketing job because my dad knew the owner, and my mom still did her laundry and cooked her special meals because Saren was just so stressed and sensitive and creative. I wish I were exaggerating. I work 60-hour weeks in finance while Saren posts TikToks by the pool. My mom gushes about her artistry and her potential, while I'm the boring one they call when the credit card bill is due. I kept telling myself that if I stayed reliable, if I stayed generous, if I didn't complain, they would eventually see me. Maybe they would remember my birthday without Facebook reminding them. Maybe they would ask about my son without me bringing him up first. Writing this out now makes me realize how pathetic I sounded even to myself back then. What was I trying to prove? That if I paid enough, they would love me the way they loved her. I talked about it endlessly with my therapist, who gently told me I was trapped in a cycle of trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. I nodded, agreed, and then sent the next payment anyway. Every time I thought about cutting them off, guilt twisted in my stomach. What if they lost the house? What if my dad couldn't afford his heart medication? What if Saren had nowhere to live? I ignored the quieter question that scared me more than all the others. What if I stopped paying and nothing about how they treated me changed at all? 2 years ago, my life basically imploded. My husband, Jake, who I thought was my actual soulmate, decided that banging his 23-year-old intern was more important than our marriage and son. We had been together since sophomore year of college. That is 13 freaking years, people. And I found out in the most cliche way possible he forgot his iPad at home, and a message popped up that said, "Last night was amazing. Cannot wait to see you later." And I felt my whole body go cold, like my blood understood what my brain was still refusing to accept. And I remember staring at that screen so long my eyes started burning. Like if I blinked, it would become real. I am not proud of it, but I went full detective mode and found hundreds of texts between them going back months. All the little jokes, all the secret plans, all the casual cruelty of two people building a life inside my marriage. And when I confronted him, he did not even try to deny it. He just said, "I was not planning to tell you like this. But yeah, I have met someone else." Someone else. She was literally an intern at his company. He moved out that night, filed for divorce 2 weeks later, and was living with her within a month. They are married now, by the way. And she posts those sickening love of my life captions on Instagram all the time, like she won a prize instead of breaking a family. I was absolutely wrecked, like could not get out of bed, forgot to eat, crying in the shower, wrecked. The only thing keeping me functioning was our son Talon, who was 8 at the time and completely confused about why Daddy suddenly moved out. He would ask me questions I could not answer without feeling like I was swallowing glass. And at night, after he finally fell asleep, I would lie there staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the last year, searching for the exact day my husband stopped being mine and started being someone else's. And it made me feel stupid in a way that is hard to explain, not just betrayed, but erased. So I called my parents because I thought now they would finally step up. Their daughter's marriage just exploded. Their grandson is confused and hurting. Surely this is when family comes through, right? But my mom's response was, "Well, sweetie, men have needs. Were you maybe too focused on your career? Did you let yourself go a little after Talon was born?" And I was so stunned I could not even respond. My dad's contribution to the conversation was asking if I would still be sending money for their car payment that month. Not a single question about how Talon was handling it. Not a single question about whether I needed help. It was like my pain was background noise, like a commercial break before the real topic, the bills. I hung up and just sat on my kitchen floor crying for like an hour. Not even the loud kind, more like silent shaking, the kind that feels like your body is trying to fold in on itself. And in that moment, I realized something that made my chest ache. I had spent my whole life believing my parents would show up when it mattered most, and they never did. They only showed up when it was convenient for them, or profitable, and somehow I still kept hoping the next crisis would be the one that finally made them love me correctly. Then something completely unexpected happened. Jakey's parents called me, and I was dreading talking to them because I figured they would take their son's side and I would lose them too. But Linda, Jake's mom, said, "We do not care what is happening between you and Jake. You are still our daughter, and Talon is still our grandson." And I remember gripping the phone so tight my hand hurt, because no one had ever said something that loyal to me before, not even my own mother. And they showed up, like really showed up. They picked up Talon from school when I had to work late. They kept him overnight when I had important meetings early the next day. Tom never missed a single baseball game, even when Jake himself was too busy to attend. Linda taught Talon how to bake and helped him with his homework. And one time I had a total breakdown because the dishwasher flooded my kitchen at 10 p.m., and Jake would not answer his phone to help. I called Tom in desperation, and he drove 45 minutes to my house, fixed the dishwasher, helped me clean up the water, and then refused to take any money for it. I kept thinking, these people have no obligation to me, and yet they are doing what my own family will not do. Meanwhile, my parents could not even remember Talon's birthday. They sent a card 2 weeks late with a $15 Walmart gift card, but they sure remembered to call when their roof started leaking and they needed $7,000 for repairs. And the contrast was so stark it made me feel nauseous. Linda and Tom treated me like family. Even when they had no reason to, my actual blood relatives treated me like an inconvenience unless they needed cash. And I kept telling myself that is just how they are, that they show love differently, that I should not expect too much. But deep down, I knew the truth. They just did not care that much about me or Talon. We were not priorities. We were ATMs with pulses. For the 2 years after the divorce, I barely heard from my parents unless a bill was due. They would occasionally ask about Talon in that vague, obligatory way that made it obvious they didn't actually know anything about his life. They never came to his school play. They never showed up to a soccer game. Saren's birthday, though, was a mandatory family event with catered food, custom decorations, and a gift I usually ended up paying for. Talon's birthday didn't even warrant a phone call unless I reminded them. I kept telling myself not to take it personally, that they were just busy, that this was normal, even though every instinct in me knew it wasn't. Then, about 6 months ago, something strange started happening. My parents suddenly turned into these involved, attentive grandparents like someone had flipped a switch overnight. It started with my mom calling me on a random Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of a work meeting when her name popped up on my phone, and my first thought was that something must be wrong because she never called unless they needed money. I stepped out to answer, bracing myself. Instead, she casually asked how Talon was doing in school, like this was a question she asked all the time. I almost dropped my phone. She didn't even know what grade he was in. I stammered through an answer, waiting for the pivot to whatever expense was coming, but it never came. She just chatted, asked if he was still into dinosaurs, which he hadn't been for years, and then invited us over for Sunday dinner. Sunday dinner. We hadn't been invited for a meal since before the divorce, and even then, it always felt like we were imposing. When we showed up that weekend, the house was spotless. There were actual place settings on the table. My mom had made Talon's favorite dessert, or what used to be his favorite when he was younger. My dad put his phone down and asked Talon about school, even dug out some old comic books from the attic that used to be mine. As we were leaving, they offered to babysit. Babysit? These were the same people who once told me they didn't sign up for childcare duties when I asked them to watch Talon for 2 hours, so I could go to a doctor's appointment. My mom smiled too brightly and said we could even leave him for a whole weekend if I wanted, that I deserved some me time. I did not know how to feel. Part of me was suspicious, but a much louder part of me felt hopeful in a way that scared me. Maybe they'd changed. Maybe they'd had a health scare they weren't telling me about. Maybe they finally realized what they were missing. That bizarre behavior continued for weeks. Sunday dinners became regular. They started calling to check on Talon. They bought him gifts for no reason. They even showed up at one of his soccer games. My dad complaining about the folding chairs the entire time, but still, he was there. I cried in my car afterward because it felt like I was finally getting the family I had always wanted. I increased their monthly allowance without even thinking about it. On top of the bills I was already paying, I started sending an extra $1,500 a month. I paid for their kitchen renovation, including the granite countertops, because they were helping so much with Talon. My coworker Jen thought I was out of my mind. She kept saying people don't change that fast without a reason, but I shut her down. I didn't want to hear it. I was too busy soaking up their approval, like it might disappear if I questioned it. Talon, however, was suspicious from day one. On the drive home after the third Sunday dinner, he asked why Nana and Pop suddenly wanted him around all the time when they never cared before. I told him they were making up for lost time, that sometimes people realize what matters when they get older. He stared out the window for a long moment and then said they still didn't know what grade he was in and Pop had called him the wrong name earlier. He pointed out that they kept asking about my job now, about raises and bonuses, things they never cared about unless money was involved. He was right, and I knew it, but I ignored it anyway. I wanted to believe they loved us. I needed to believe it. I convinced myself the details didn't matter. That effort was effort, even if it was sloppy and late. I told myself that for once, things were finally going to be different. And that is exactly why I didn't see what was coming next, even though all the signs were right there. I found out the truth on a completely ordinary afternoon, which somehow made it hurt more. I stopped by my parents' house unannounced to drop off groceries I had bought for them, because yes, I was paying for their food too, and I came in through the side door like I always did. My mom was in the kitchen on the phone and didn't hear me. I froze in the hallway when I heard my name, spoken in that smug, satisfied tone she used when she thought she was being clever. "Yes, we've got her sending extra now," she said, laughing softly. "The kitchen will be finished by Christmas. No, we just have to pretend to care about the kid for a few hours a week. Small price to pay for a new Sub-Zero fridge." I felt like someone had punched me in the chest and knocked all the air out at once. I stood there staring at the wall, my heart pounding so hard it hurt, listening as she kept talking, casually admitting that the dinners, the babysitting offers, the sudden interest in Talon were all an act. It wasn't love, it wasn't guilt, it was strategy. I backed out quietly and sat in my car for almost 20 minutes, not crying, not moving, just staring straight ahead like my brain had short-circuited. Later, I found out she had been talking to Saren. My sister knew about the whole thing and thought it was funny. They were playing me and laughing about it behind my back like it was some harmless family joke. When I got home, I pulled up my bank statements and my hands started shaking. In the 6 months since they started their loving grandparents' routine, I had given them an extra $15,000 on top of everything else. $15,000 for fake affection. I wanted to confront them immediately. I rehearsed the speech in my head about how they had used me for years and how it was finally going to stop. But instead, something in me went quiet. I decided to wait. I wanted to see how far they would take it, how low they would go. I didn't have to wait long for life to test that decision. About a month later, I started getting these brutal headaches, the kind that wake you up in the middle of the night and make you beg for relief. I have always had migraines, so at first I blamed stress and kept pushing through, popping Advil and pretending everything was fine. My coworker Jen noticed me squinting at my screen and wearing sunglasses indoors and kept telling me to see a doctor. I brushed her off like working moms do, telling myself I didn't have time. Then one morning, I woke up and everything was wrong. The pain was unbearable, and when I looked in the mirror, my left eye wasn't tracking properly. Part of my vision was dark and blurry, and my head felt like it was about to split open. I panicked, but my first instinct was to call Jake, which I immediately regretted when it went straight to voicemail. He was on his honeymoon in Bali with the woman he left us for, posting smiling photos like our life had never existed. Linda and Tom were on a long planned cruise, and my neighbor was the only person I could think of. She came over in her pajamas to stay with Talon while I drove myself to the emergency room, a decision I now know was incredibly stupid. The drive is mostly a blur, but I remember pulling over to throw up and thinking about Talon waking up and not finding me there. The moment I told the triage nurse about the sudden vision loss and the worst headache of my life, everything changed. I was rushed back immediately, surrounded by doctors with serious faces. A neurologist showed me the scans and told me I had a leaking berry aneurysm and needed emergency surgery. If we waited, he didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need him to. All I could think about was Talon. Who would pick him up from school? Who would tuck him in? What would happen to him if I didn't wake up? As they prepped me for surgery, I called my mom, crying, begging her to please just pick Talon up from school and watch him for the night. She sounded annoyed. She said they were taking Saren out to celebrate her promotion at a steakhouse downtown and asked if Talon's father couldn't handle it. I told her Jake was out of the country. I told her I might not survive the surgery. Saren's voice cut in, sharp and dismissive, saying my kid was always causing drama and draining everyone's energy, just like me. Then she said the words that burned themselves into my memory forever. She called my 10-year-old son a worthless burden. My mom didn't defend him. She sighed and said the timing was inconvenient. I hung up the phone and sobbed so hard a nurse had to steady me. A hospital social worker stepped in and arranged for Talon to go home with a friend until someone could help. A stranger did more for my child in 5 minutes than my own family would do in a lifetime. As they wheeled me toward the operating room, clarity settled over me in a way I had never felt before. If I survived, I was done. No more money, no more chances, no more hoping. They had shown me exactly who they were, and this time I was finally going to believe them. I survived the surgery, obviously, since I am here telling this story, but the recovery was brutal in ways I was not prepared for. I spent a full week in the hospital, drifting in and out of sleep, learning how to sit up without the room spinning, relearning patience with my own body. Want to know who showed up? Linda and Tom cut their cruise short and flew home as soon as they heard what happened. They took turns sitting by my hospital bed, holding my hand, making sure I ate something other than hospital gelatin. Tom helped Talon with his homework over FaceTime so I could rest, and Linda bought me real pajamas so I would not have to live in a gown. She even washed my hair in the sink when I was too weak to stand. My boss rearranged my entire workload and told me to take as much time as I needed. My neighbors set up a meal train. Jen took Talon to his soccer game so he would not miss it. My parents sent a text 3 days after my surgery, asking if I would still be making the mortgage payment on time because the bank had called. That was it. Lying there with a 10-inch incision on my head and a second chance at life, something inside me finally snapped into place. I realized that almost dying had given me clarity I had been avoiding for decades. I was not their daughter to them. I was their safety net, and I was done. While I was still in my hospital bed, I started making calls. I contacted the bank that held their mortgage and informed them I would no longer be responsible for payments. I canceled the automatic transfers. I called both auto loan companies and did the same. Credit cards, insurance premiums, cell phone bills, internet, streaming services, all of it gone. I even canceled their country club membership that I had been paying for so they could complain about their neighbors over golf. As I dug through my finances, I found payments for Saren's gym membership, her Amazon Prime, even her Botox appointments. I canceled everything. By the time I was done, I had reclaimed over $4,000 a month. When my mom finally called, she was frantic. The bank had called again. She demanded to know what was going on. I told her calmly that I had canceled all financial support. She exploded, crying about bills, medication, property taxes, how they would lose everything. I reminded her that Saren had just gotten promoted and maybe she could help out. I repeated her own words back to her about inconvenience and timing. When she tried to justify Saren calling my son a worthless burden, something I will never forgive, I ended the call and blocked their numbers. I felt lighter than I ever had. The fallout was exactly what you would expect. Their car was repossessed. They fell behind on their mortgage. My dad got a part-time job. My mom joined a pyramid scheme. Saren moved out and started posting videos online about toxic family members who abandon you. They tried to contact me through relatives and friends, even sent a letter asking me to reconsider, complete with an itemized list of bills they wanted me to pay. I did not respond. My lawyer did. My life, on the other hand, transformed. I paid off my debt. I started a college fund for Talon. We took a vacation together. I slept better. I breathed easier. Linda and Tom are still incredible, the kind of grandparents every kid deserves. And then something unexpected happened. My neurosurgeon asked me out for coffee. His name is Cade. He is kind, steady, a single parent like me. Our kids get along. There is no chaos, no manipulation, just two adults choosing peace. Sometimes it takes almost dying to learn how to live. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop paying other people's bills and finally invest in yourself. 3 months have passed since what my therapist jokingly calls the great financial liberation, and the strangest part is how quiet my life has become. Not empty quiet, not lonely quiet, but the kind of silence that feels earned, the kind that lets you hear your own thoughts without bracing for the next emergency, the next demand, the next wave of guilt. I did not realize how loud my life had been until the noise stopped. At first, I kept waiting for the guilt to swallow me whole. I expected sleepless nights, panic attacks, that sick, twisting feeling in my stomach telling me I had done something unforgivable. Instead, I felt relief. Heavy, unfamiliar relief. It was like putting down a weight I did not know I had been carrying since childhood. I stopped checking my phone every time it buzzed. I stopped flinching when an unknown number called. I stopped rehearsing explanations for boundaries I was no longer negotiating. Talon changed too. He is lighter now, more relaxed. He laughs more easily. He sleeps through the night without crawling into my bed because he senses my tension. One evening, while we were doing homework at the kitchen table, he looked up at me and said very casually, "You smile more now, Mom." That was when I had to excuse myself to the bathroom and cry, because my 10-year-old noticed before anyone else ever had. Linda and Tom remain exactly who they have always been: steady, present, real. They never once asked me to forgive my parents or tried to soften what happened. They simply said they were proud of me for protecting my son and myself. Tom still shows up to every game. Linda still texts me reminders to drink water and rest. They do not demand gratitude. They do not keep score. They just love us. And then there is Cade. He never pushed, never rushed, never treated my trauma like something he needed to fix. He listened. He showed up when he said he would. He asked before touching me, even when it came to something as small as holding my hand. Watching him with Talon still makes my chest ache in the best way. Not because he is trying to replace anyone, but because he respects that Talon is a person with thoughts and boundaries of his own. Zoe has started opening up too. Grief recognizes grief. They are learning each other slowly, carefully, without pressure. My parents, from what I hear through distant relatives, are still telling their version of the story. In their version, I am cruel, ungrateful, brainwashed by therapy. In Saren's version, I am toxic, controlling, abusive with money. I do not correct them. I do not defend myself. I have learned that people who benefit from your silence will always resent your voice, and I no longer need to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding me. I used to believe family meant endurance, that love meant sacrifice without limit, that being a good daughter meant being small, useful, and quiet. Almost dying taught me something different. Love is not something you purchase with exhaustion. Family is not defined by blood alone. And boundaries are not cruelty, they are clarity. I survived a brain aneurysm, but more importantly, I survived a lifetime of being told my worth was conditional. I am no longer funding my own neglect. I am building a life where my son grows up knowing he is valued, where peace is not something we earn, but something we protect. Sometimes the miracle is not surviving the surgery. Sometimes the miracle is finally walking away. No one really talks about what happens after you cut people off. Not in the dramatic way movies show it, but in the slow, quiet aftermath that creeps into your life when the adrenaline fades. The truth is, going no contact did not magically erase decades of conditioning overnight. It just removed the daily source of damage. Healing came later, uneven and uncomfortable, in waves I did not expect. The first wave was grief, not for who my parents were, but for who they were never going to be. I grieved the fantasy version of them I had carried since childhood, the parents who would one day wake up and realize I was worthy of care without invoices attached. Letting go of that hope hurt more than any argument ever had. Hope, I learned, can be more painful than reality when it keeps you trapped. There were moments when something good happened, and my instinct was still to reach for my phone. When Talon brought home a perfect score on a science test, my first thought was to tell my dad. When I got a positive follow-up scan and the neurologist smiled and said everything looked stable, I almost called my mom. My hands would hover, and then I would remember. Not with anger anymore, but with clarity. I would put the phone down and breathe through the disappointment like a muscle cramp, sharp but temporary. Extended family began to surface, people I had not heard from in years, suddenly very invested in reconciliation. They spoke in that careful, patronizing tone, telling me I needed to be the bigger person, reminding me that my parents were getting older, that family is family. None of them asked what it felt like to be called a burden while facing death. None of them asked how Talon slept after hearing those words. Their concern was not about healing, it was about restoring the old balance, where I absorbed the damage so everyone else could stay comfortable. Therapy changed after that. It stopped being about survival and started being about identity. My therapist asked me a question that stuck with me for weeks. Who are you when no one is extracting from you? I did not know how to answer at first. So much of my sense of self had been built around being useful, dependable, necessary. Removing that role felt like stepping into a room with no furniture, empty, but full of possibility. I started doing small, almost rebellious things. Saying no without over-explaining, leaving work on time, buying myself something without mentally calculating how it might affect someone else, letting Talon choose how we spent our weekends instead of dragging him to obligations he never asked for. These were not grand acts, but they felt radical. Each one chipped away at the belief that my value came from sacrifice. Cade noticed before I did. One night, as we sat on opposite ends of the couch while the kids watched a movie, he said, "You don't apologize for existing as much anymore." I laughed, then realized he was right. I had spent my life softening my presence, shrinking my needs, smoothing edges so no one else would feel inconvenienced by me. Now I was learning how to take up space without guilt. The biggest shift came with Talon. One afternoon, he asked if Nana and Pop were ever going to apologize. I told him honestly that they probably would not. He nodded, thought for a moment, and said, "That's okay. We don't need people who are mean when things are scary." The simplicity of it took my breath away. He had already learned the lesson I was still practicing. I used to think strength meant enduring anything. Now I understand that strength is choosing what you will no longer endure. The aftershocks of cutting them off are still there, ripples that surface when I least expect them, but they no longer control the ground beneath my feet. I am building something steadier now, something honest. And for the first time in my life, I am not waiting for permission to live it.